came to the New World, to the colonies. Some came for riches because, they had been told that there's just gold laying around and you pick it up and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of people came to get away from a too structured religious life that they didn't agree with, or that they didn't they couldn't worship as they wanted. And so the best thing to do was, you think about it, and the first people that came were in Jamestown, Virginia, and I don't know that they came for religious purposes much as to found a colony for the king and things of that nature. But we certainly have all heard about the Pilgrims, and they came and they landed at Plymouth, and they, we have all grown up with the first Thanksgiving and the turkeys and the Indians and all that. Native Americans, indigenous tribes, whatever name we want to put on them. But if we looked at all of these groups that came at different times, usually beginning in the early 1600s and down through the 1700s and then later, a lot of these groups that came, they came with a religious, for a religious reason or to have freedom, and they brought with them, all of these brought with them some element that we today recognize. It was all Reformed for the most part. Now, they were Catholics that came and other groups, but we're talking primarily about the Presbyterian group and Presbyterian ideals. These all came with Reformed ideas, Reformed religious ideas. The Pilgrims, the New England Puritans, we've always, when you watch movies and things, the New England people are uptight. The Southern people, we're kind of laid back. Some people says it has to do with the climate. If you're cold a lot of the times, you can't be happy. Some people say. If you're the old idea that if you're in a hot climate or whatever, you're kind of lazy and laid back. You don't want to get in a hurry. There's probably some truth to that, but so here we are, the Puritans here. A lot of the folks that we have gotten our religious path denomination from has been from the Scotch Irish, because they, the Presbyterian church, so to speak, was first really organized or developed in Scotland, and some of the Irish that were not Catholic and whatever, so they came over. And you notice where these people landed. The Scotch Irish landed some in Pennsylvania, and some of them in North and South Carolina, and up and down that. And these people filtered inward later on. Talking last week to Lenore and to Sarah Reed, I had thought I'd heard this. They came before they moved here. Where did Sarah come from? From what state did she move down here? Do you know, Susan?
I don't know.
But she was in the Dutch Reformed, and so was Lenore. And so the Dutch Reformed Church was a, quote, Presbyterian church that was from the Dutch, just like the Presbyterian church that we think sometimes. We look at our ancestry or our beginning had a lot to do from Scotland. Well, these people moved in and everything, and so they, as the wilderness, as they called it then, the Ohio Valley and all through in the Appalachians, these people moved in. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the awakenings, the Great Awakenings. You know how many Great Awakenings there've been? I'm talking about in the United States or prior to the beginning of folks coming to the United States. Think about how many awakenings, and we probably maybe in an awakening now. You know, sometimes it's kind of like a recession. You don't know that you're in a recession until you come out of it. Then you know that you've been in a recession. We may not know that we're in an awakening until we get to a certain point where we come out of it with regard to beliefs and with regard to religion and church. So anyway, these people came. And so we've been invaded now by all these ideas. And you know, I like to have fun with words, but I didn't make up this word. I found this word, a Presbyterianist. Presbyterianist. Well, in New England, the Congregational Church is a church that really is a Reformed church, but it has very similar. You'll find people when they come south and they can't find a congregational church, so to speak, that based on Reformed ideas that first seemed to gel and came over, they'll end up perhaps in a Presbyterian church. But a congregational church and a Presbyterian church are much similar in the organization, except the congregational church is more, it doesn't have the hierarchy that what we have in the Presbyterian church. Now, you know, last week I talked about the horizontal and the vertical. You know, we tend to be horizontal. Can't say that word. But you know, we're having the presbytery here in a month or so, right? Mm-hmm. Well, there's a hierarchy there, and the General Assembly. So we're not totally horizontal. We're not totally level as a Presbyterian church, because we've got groups that are here and we've got groups that are here. But ultimately, the congregation itself, the session, the members in a Presbyterian church are really the top of the thing. It's a bottom up, not a top down, so to speak. But anyway, so Presbyterianist mixed up. You might not have known you were Presbyterian. You might not have known you were a Congregationalist. So, all right, the first presbytery that was formed in the United States was in 1706 in Philadelphia, and I hope I pronounced his name right. Dan, you could help me. Francis McCamey, is that how you pronounce his name? Francis?
I think so.
He was the first Presbyterian. He is known as the father of Presbyterianism in the United States. Okay? And on your sheet, I gave you another sheet because some of you left them last week. So I know you didn't. But what I did this week, because I learned this from teaching 8th graders, is that if you give them something, they leave it behind, you give them another copy the next week, and you draw or circle the things that you really want them to pay attention to. It's like somebody the other day, I was talking to somebody that had a college professor, and when he told him at the first day of the class in college, that if when he said something that you really wanted to know, he really wanted you to know it was going to be on the test, he'd stomp his foot. So, you know, some professors would say, write this down, and you do that. But anyway, so I gave you this sheet, and it'll have on the circles. You'll notice in 1706, the first Presbyterian in Philadelphia, that's the first organized group of Presbyterian churches. And then it didn't take them long, from 1706 to in the 1741, they had a split. And that was called the old side and the new side. And that was in 1741. And what was it over? Basically over educational standards. And if you're going to see this all the way, educational standards for ministers. Educational standards. And we're going to see that again as we come down to the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. So it's an old, that wasn't the only thing, but that's the big thing. They wanted the ministers, the old side wanted to uphold the level of training and being in seminary, they started seminaries and they wanted to uphold that. The new side said, look, we're expanding out into the new parts of the countryside, or new parts, new territories. We don't have enough ministers. We don't have enough ministers. We have to relax. We have to depend on people who are knowledgeable to help form new churches, missionaries to help form new churches. So the old side, new side, you're going to see that again, old school, new school. They still were talking about that in the 1840s. So there was a lot more of that, but you can just look on there and see where they split. They split again in the 1840s and 50s, but this time they didn't call it old side, new side. They called it old school, new school. But up here, and we'll get to John Witherspoon. John Witherspoon was the only active Presbyterian clergyman, only clergyman that was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So we had the Presbyterian Church had influence at that level of government at the beginning. That's to me, that's very impressive, because it means that what we all think is that our government was intended to be founded with Christian principles. Not that, as we've learned all the way through now, that in the United States, we don't have a national religion, but Christian principles were at the very forefront of the development of this country. So John Witherspoon is this name I want you to remember. I think the street that the PCUSA headquarters, and it's in Kentucky. Am I right about that? It is in Kentucky.
Yeah.
I think the street that it's on, or the circle that it's on, is named Witherspoon, in honor of John Witherspoon.
And that's one of the three publishing houses.
One of the three publishing
Presbyterian Church.
Yes.
And this is interesting because in human history there are patterns, and this really identifies a very powerful pattern that we live with every day, and it's a distinction that the Constitution acknowledges, and that is to say between form and spirit. It's between the formalization of order in language, doctrine, objects, concepts, and what the Greeks call the dunamis, the spirit, the drive. And what you have here over and over again is this paradox that is intrinsic to the human condition as well as the religious one, because I've been reading Native American legends and culture from Schoolcraft, who studied Native Americans, and one of the things that they mention is that in the treaties that the Indians were signing with the white people from America, the young warriors were hard to control. The older men wanted order, and they wanted to sign the treaties, because without order you can't have justice, see? And every time in the history of the church, the spiritual, the power wants to break out of these earthen vessels, because all law and theology is an earthen vessel, so you break them out for the sake of the spirit. But if you go too far, you've got chaos. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's so important.
Well, we call it the Reformation, but it would be fair to say it was a revolution. We called it the Reformation, but it was really a revolution in a lot of ways. So, 6 one, half dozen with other. It's like the word that I think of as we say confessional, or we have a confession. In some people's mind, when you say confession, they think you're telling something that you've done wrong. Mm-hmm. That's what well, just go ahead and confess to me what you did today. But I think of a word always that it's kind of like it's a brother word or a sister word, is profession. Mm-hmm. This is what I profess that I believe in. We call it a confession. We just want to be sure we understand the word. Some confessions are this and some confessions are that. Some professions are this and some professions are that. So we have to understand with the word we use. All right, let's get to the Cumberland Presbyterian, because that affects our area a lot, okay? And we have some Cumberland folks here, right, Dan? And Joe and Brenda? And their traditional background is Cumberland. So in 1810, and I'm sure it just didn't happen on that exact minute, but the Cumberland Presbyterian split much from the regular Presbyterian, big Presbyterian, most Presbyterian, whichever number you want to put it. Here again, over training, other things too, more conservative approach. But basically, the Cumberland River Valley in Kentucky and Tennessee was the new wilderness, and they needed spiritual guidance there. They needed churches there. The bottom line, the Methodist Church was kind of eating their breakfast, because they had circuit riders later on. They went out and they didn't have as stricter guidelines on the training and of ministry. So the Cumberland says people can be called to the ministry without having to go through all of this, without having to go through seminary for years and years and whatever, because that's going to limit. So, but that was, and I think I mentioned it. Nancy and I went a few years ago. We just happened to be meandering around, as I said, up through Tennessee, and we meandered to Montgomery Bell Park, State Park. And in Montgomery Bell Park, in the north, kind of west or central west of Tennessee, that's the park, is this little cabin in Montgomery Bell Park that is a replica, but it is the center point of where the first Cumberland Presbyterian organization meeting took place among Presbyterian ministers. Even though it's a replica, and there's a chapel next door to it, even though it's a replica, you get a good feeling when you go in there that something different happened here. And so here again, we're fighting over different things here. We're arguing over different ways to do that. But the main thing is they needed to push westward, and they needed ministers. They needed missionaries. And if you wait too long to train them, you're losing the opportunity to bring these people to Christ. Is what it comes down to. And as I said, the Methodist and the Baptist were eating the lunch, and so to speak. They were, I've heard of circuit riders. I went to the Methodist church for a lot in my younger days, and we had to wait. Our worship was at 11 o'clock, but we had to wait till the minister got there from his 10 o'clock sermon at the neighboring church about 5 miles down the road. That was they still have, and we call them yoked churches in the Presbyterian church. You're yoked together. But they had a circuit rider, and they came around once every 6 weeks back in the old days, and you had to wait to get baptized then. You had to wait to get married then. If you wanted to do that, you had to wait, And so evidently, some people thought you ought not have to wait that long. You didn't have to wait 6 months till the preacher came by for things. So here again, back to the old school, new school, same thing, much more complicated, but that's where we were. And then the north and south break in the Presbyterian church, of course, was over slavery. Started before the actual Civil War, probably lasted on after it, but that was a break, because some, the Presbyterians, some said it's not right like a lot of other churches, to hold people in bondage. And of course, in the South, it was an economical thing as well as a cultural thing. And so those churches could not, and those churches stayed split for a long time. You can look on to when they came back together and things of that nature. All right. Now, this is exciting to me. Now, some of my students used to say, well, he gets excited about that. The Great Awakenings. The Great Awakenings. Revivals. A time of spiritual focus that we needed to you can call them mini reformations in some respects. And from this came a lot of different things, a lot of different denominations. But the first Great Awakening was in the 1730s and 1740s. A new feeling of spiritual revival. The second one came from the 1790s into the early 1800s. Now here again, it didn't stop on a point. It didn't begin on a point. And some of the influences that it has was much later. And the third was in the 1850s to the 1900s. And this may not be totally correct because some of this, you've all heard of Chautauqua, right? In New York,
yeah.
The big meetings they had in the summer, they had the camps, the Sunday school teaching and things of that nature, you know. And so, you know, you went to those. Did you know there's one in Monteagle, Tennessee? There's a much like that occurred in the late 1800s, early 1900s in Monteagle, Tennessee. They have a great big pavilion. They had summer camps and things of that nature to train Sunday school teachers, to revitalize members and things. It got to the point, and if you ever have a chance, and that might be a good day trip one day, because you go into the Monteagle Assembly grounds, and there's all kinds of real nice cabins, as they called them back then. It's kind of a Victorian-looking cottages and cabins back in there, and people have owned them for years. They don't own the ground. They may own the cabin, but they don't own the ground. But they pass it. It's a spiritual place, and Nancy and I've been there a couple of times. It's a good little just to ride through there and to imagine in days past when there were horses and carriages and people coming from all over here for the purpose of renewing themselves. So these are awakenings, and out of those came different churches and different denominations and different things. Out of the third one came two important things, and here again involved in government. Religious ideals were involved in government. Suffrage, the right to vote, especially for women, and prohibition. One of the presidents, Harrison, was the second president, Harrison. His wife would not allow alcohol to be served in the White House. She was called Lemonade Lucy. So all of this had an effect on everything. But here again, these are all history that evolved and devolved from Presbyterian ideals that we call Presbyterian, Reformed ideas. Remember, Presbyterian is a polity.
And there was another thing, right, in the 1850s to the 1900s, it was called the Sunday School movement in America.
Yes.
Now, this was very important because we're probably an expression of that ourselves, but the Sunday School movement emerges about the same time that infant mortality begins to decline in America. You have this surge of population in the 1850s through the 1900s, and with the increased medical ability to treat infant diseases, children are growing older, more of them. And the second thing that happened is it's a way for the country that was very diverse at the time to be shaped by a common vision. And so the Sunday School movement was very, very, very important. And there was a huge explosion of growth in the church of Sunday schools. In fact, you would have the superintendent who was almost as powerful as the pastor was. And this is very important. And of course, this whole facility is an expression of that Sunday school movement. You have these kind of organizations with all of these rooms. You didn't have that in the earlier time. And
to move on real quick, there may have been a fourth awakening. I don't know if it's been called that, but it seems to have been alluded to in the 1960s, called the Jesus movement. You know, we've all heard that. Was that an awakening? We probably won't know if it was an awakening till later. It may have already ended, and another one may be going on. So it's kind of like I said about the recession. I do want to bring this up, and there was another movement called the Restoration, and it happened in 1801. Cane River, one place calls it the Cane River Revival in the early 1800s, and out of that came several denominations, organizations, congregations, the Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, and those. And the reason I mention that is because these three gentlemen here, Barton Stone, Thomas Campbell, his son Alexander Campbell, were key players in that movement. These were all Presbyterian trained ministers, all. So Presbyterian ideals have just moved into all different groups, and we can't take credit for them. We can go all the way back to the Reformation, go all the way back to the Bible with the elders that mentioned in the Bible. But anyway, so those are just some things that, and then try to hurry up. Here we are. Where do you want to be? Where are you? PCUSA, PCA, CPC, CPCA, Associated Reform, Evangelical PC. Which one of those, and there's more, which one of the alphabet soups are you
USA.
In? Okay. PCA. That's, we have, see, the church in Tuscumbia is a PCA.
Conservative.
Huh?
Conservative.
Conservative. CPC. Cumberland Presbyterian. CPCA, Cumberland Presbyterian Church of America, basically a black congregation or black organization with the same, basically the same. This splintered off in the late 1800s, I believe. And then some more newer ones, Associate Reformed. I believe that's the one that's over here where by Hobby Lobby. I believe they may be an Associate Reformed Presbyterian. There's an Evangelical Presbyterian. I know there's some in Huntsville. And so out of these, this is today, and more and more. You can look on your chart. You can look on your paper and see that. Now, here's where I think today, at the end of the day, the rubber meets the road. Which path led you to a Presbyterian church? Was it a traditional path that Alonda and I talked about? Her family has been Presbyterian for how many generations?
3 or 4, yeah.
3. A related path? Cumberland, Dutch Reformed, related. Or you just a seeker? You had none of this. You were just seeking, and it seemed to hit you. Or was there another path that led you to this? Which path? But does it matter which path? When you come to, here I am, Lord, take me and do with me what you would have. Do with me what you would have.
This is the crisis that we face today in the Presbyterian Church. We're facing it all over the world. We're facing it in this country. We're facing it in this presbytery. It does make a difference which one you come to. We have ceased, and you didn't list it there. Mm-hmm. It's like the disciples and the early church. Someone has to bring you there. Someone has to reach out their hand to you and say, would you come join me in my faith? And we have ceased to do that for a generation now, and we see the evidence of it. And if we don't change our ways, the Presbyterian Church will continue to dissipate over time. And I think that's the reason why I think this is important, and I appreciate so much what you're doing and everything, but this is the crisis we have to be constantly reminded of. It's a crisis, the evidence of which is everywhere to be seen in our communities and our institutions. Okay? We're not reaching out enough.
Yeah.
We're not
Well, I would say this: if you're seeking, then somebody should reach out to you. If you're seeking, but you don't know somebody's seeking, so we don't like this word sometimes. We got a committee, I think. We got a committee for everything, but we got evangelism. We don't, I don't know that we do a lot of evangelism. Maybe we're afraid that we'll be counted as too emotional with evangelism. Now, I'm not meaning shouting and carrying on and doing stuff like that. If that's your thing, that's your thing, and I'm fine with that. I've been to churches with that, and I've got family members where I deal with that. I respect them. But we're just, I've been here 25 years. Right or wrong, it's taken us almost that time to get used
To clap
to applause. Okay? Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But I've seen it evolve. I've seen when we first came, people were sitting on their hands. I've seen it come along. What does it mean? That's for you to decide. And what do you mean by that? Some people say, well, you shouldn't give praise to the individual. So what do you mean by that? That's for you to decide, I think. But we also have that thing that we all remember. We must do things decently and in order. Decently and in order. Okay. All right. That's it for me.